Thank you, Suzanne, for inviting me to introduce our speaker. If you want to translate a Dutch idiom, there's a wonderful site in the internet, and that site places the idiom within the context of a historical document. And usually it also has the name of an important actor in that document. So, for example, if you want to translate from Dutch into English the idiom over iets nadenken, to think about something, you go to this site and you will see that the passage that they have chosen comes from the Sobibor hearings in 2009, 2011 in Munich. And this is the sentence that you will read when you look at that site. MartinHaas hoefde geen seconde na te denken over zijn deelname aan het proces van John Demjanjuk. In English it means MartinHaas didn't hesitate a second to participate in that process in Munich against John Demjanjuk. Those of you who have read the program know that Dr. Haas has been on the faculty of this university since 1981. He has been an inspiring teacher and one of the most experienced scholars in the field of oncology. He has published widely, over 100 papers to his name. He is a specialist. His focus is on prostate cancer, but he has another focus as well, and that is the transmission to a new generation of the extent to which Nazism or the horror of the Holocaust in the Second World War. And one of the things that he specifically wants people to know is the extent to which racism kills, devastates, the horrors of it all. Dr. Haas himself was 3 years old when the Second World War broke out in 1940. In a few days, his city was bombed, his house was devastated, and 2 years later, in the fall of 1942, I may not have the date right, but there was a lady came to the house at night, and his mother gave Dr. Haas and his sister to this lady in the dark. She took him to the station, they took the train, they went to a new city, a strange city. He was left with a new family that he did not know. He spent 2 years by himself, having to keep secret that he was a Jewish boy, which he never forgot, but he could not tell anybody, not knowing if there would be a knock on the door at night, that there would be a search of his house. When in 1945 the war ended, which was a joyful occasion for most Dutch people, it was a very sad situation for Dr. Haas because no one came to get him and his sister. In the fall of 1945, he learned that his father had been killed, his mother had been killed, his brother and his sister. Later he heard the words Auschwitz and Sobibor. His father worked to death in Auschwitz, his mother and his sister and his brother and many family members murdered in Sobibor. In 2009, Dr. Haas participated in the process against one of the perpetrators of the Holocaust, of this genocide against his family in Munich. He joined 20 Dutch people, some of them survivors from Sobibor, but the others all profoundly affected, permanently affected by the loss of their family. One of the journalists that was there wrote afterwards that Dr. Haas had been invited to give the final concluding statements. And this is what the journalist said, that of all the words spoken during that trial, the fiercest words were spoken by Dr. Haas. So Dr. Haas, we're so happy, so grateful that you did not hesitate a moment to participate in that process. And now we would like to hear some of your fierce words. Thank you.
Thank you, Helga, and thank you, Suzanne. A person like myself has endless stories, and I have been quoting, and this is just a guess. I could, and I will not, don't worry, I could stand here and speak interesting stories for 24 hours. I'd have to drink a little bit, eat a little bit, go to the bathroom, but that was it. And I will not, don't worry. And so my difficulty is to see what to put in a talk like this. And so I will keep to my notes, because if I do not, I just dwindle off. I wander off. I don't want to wander off. In these and similar discussions on the history of the Holocaust, and this, I believe, is an excellent series. I've been following this for 3 or 4 years. A very interesting series, and I'm honored to speak here. And thank you, Helga, for this nice introduction. In these and similar discussions on the history of the Holocaust, the subject is often approached with abstract, impersonal generalities. I have decided to approach the subject in a much more personal way, a fashion that speaks more to the soul than to the brain. Americans have a really rather uncertain understanding of what Nazi-inspired Shoah, the Holocaust, was really like. I know this from many questions in this audience which were asked of speakers in the last 3 or 4 years. The audience cannot be blamed. The USA has not experienced anything like the Shoah, has never been occupied by a evil foreign force. So how can the audience be expected to emotionally comprehend what the Shoah really means, or meant, or was like? I may be able to influence this emotional disposition today. These are my parents, nothing very special, at their wedding in 1931. And you've seen pictures like this before. And today, people don't dress this way on their wedding, but this is the way they did. One result of that marriage were these 4 kids. And you will see that I wasn't the left girl, and I wasn't the middle girl. I was one of the boys, and who it was, you can also find out by just looking at them and at me. And this is where we lived. We lived in a, we lived in a large double house. I think it was this one. I can't really see it too well, and the picture's not so good. It's from the archives of the city of Breda. I'll talk about it in a moment. There was a very large Catholic church behind, you'll see in a moment. And there was a big double house, which was built by my grandfather, Haas. And in one part, he had his business, which was then taken over when he died by my father. And in the other part, the family lived, and I was born in that house. The Holocaust was perpetrated by the German Nazis, in Europe and North Africa during World War II. Some assert that Hitler and his ilk had planned World War II to hide the extermination of the European Jews behind the confusion of the war. It's a very extreme statement, but there are many historians who see it that way. I will describe aspects of the Holocaust as perpetrated in the Nazi-occupied Low Countries, the Netherlands, and hence I will describe the way in which the Shoah was committed in the Netherlands by the Nazi occupation, its repercussions, which are of historic dimensions. I'll describe some personal aspects of this wave of Nazi terror, followed by thoughts about international law, as well as some aspects of the Demjanjuk Sobibor trial in Munich, 2009 to 2011. Hence, I will talk about the implementation of the murder of the European Jews by Nazi Germany. In the First World War, the Netherlands remained neutral, did not participate in the war. The Netherlands had extensive cultural and economic ties both with England, France, Italy, and Germany, and it succeeded to stay out of World War I, 1914. People in Europe thought that in the Second World War, 1939, which was coming up in the 30s, the Netherlands would again manage to stay out of the war. And so when the winds of war were gathering in Europe all during the 1930s, tens of thousands of German Jews and others at risk moved from Germany to Holland to escape Hitler's racist madness. Many German Jews sought refuge in the Netherlands. The Dutch then established a large camp to accommodate the many Jewish refugees who were coming from Germany. A camp called Camp Westerbork. And the camp finally was built in this empty area, agricultural or wooden area in the Netherlands, away from just any population centers. To give you the beginning of a feel of the situation, when in 1936 the Dutch government was going to build a refugee camp for displaced German Jews in the general vicinity of the center of the country, near the city of Apeldoorn, where the Queen had her castle at Loo. The Queen refused to let that happen, and she fought and fought to make sure that it was built far from the castle, not in my backyard. Was Queen Wilhelmina anti-Semitic? Possibly, though probably not. Yet, there are many different opinions on this issue in the Netherlands. On May 10, 1940, German forces attacked the Netherlands and swallowed it alive in 10 days. The Nazis established a German administration and imposed on the country a codex of decrees that made the Netherlands a virtual province of Nazi Germany. The Dutch Nazi Party, which comprised about 8% of the population, had been active in the country for 7, 8, 9 years, hoping to become part of the illustrious future Aryan Nazi nation. The Dutch Nazis collaborated willingly with the invaders from the east. Importantly, and in parentheses, had the Nazis subdued the British, and had the Nazis occupied the British Isles in World War II, and had they subdued the Russians in World War II, the US of A would have become part of the worldwide racist order. Blacks, Jews, gays, and other non-Aryan undesirables would most probably have been universally exterminated, universally. And the world as we know it would have been a vast racist nation for 1,000 years. Many serious historians have explained it that way. And you probably have seen the movie The Darkest Hour with Churchill. Had he not succeeded, had the British not succeeded to, in the end, vanquish Nazi Germany, all of us here would have been part, not me, would have been part of this racist empire of the world. After the surrender of the Netherlands, for the 140,000 Jews of Holland, things progressively but very significantly became bad. The Nazi decrees were administered by an able, loyal cadre of Dutch administrators. They were loyal to the law of the country, and right now the law of the country was the Nazi law. I will describe the decrees passed by the occupying Nazis to give you a feel how the Nazis had planned and executed their anti-Semitic program. On May 12, 1940, the French Defense Forces made it known that they would forcefully defend the garrison city of Breda, where I was born. And that city is here in the south. It was a very important railway junction. This is where I lived, where I was born, where my family lived. And the French and the Belgians here, the French to the south, decided to fight Germany, Nazi Germany, by defending this area. In order to do so, they told there was major danger to the majority of the population of the city, of Breda, and all of its inhabitants were told by the mayor to go south into Belgium and France to evade the fury of the German forces. My whole family went down, like everybody else, walking into Belgium, and Belgium wasn't all that far, 10, 15 kilometers, and stayed out of the city 5, 6, 7 days. Only when they came back, this is what they saw. This is the same house I told you before. It was destroyed. We could not go back to our house, and we had to find something else. However, this is how it started. On May 14, when people came back or wanted to come back after the city was attacked by the Nazi forces, the Jews of Breda were forbidden to return to their homes. One of the first rules. Slowly but deliberately, other Jewish measures were announced, and they comprised 4 categories. Registration. If you're Jewish, you have to register and show that you're Jewish. Isolation. They were isolated from society. Disenfranchisement, both material marginalization and depriving the Jews of the possibility of earning a living, and deportation. The measures were introduced gradually, and in the summer of 1940, Jews could not anymore use public parks. Imagine you here. You can't go to the park because you happen to be born to a Jewish father or mother. Jews could not anymore use public parks. They were forbidden to make use of public cafes and restaurants. You better stay home, you can't go out. Could not buy groceries except at a few specific grocery stores and limited to short times of the day. Jews were forbidden to ride the trams and the trolleys. You better walk. And they were forbidden to use most trains. In late 1940, all city councilmen were required to declare their Aryan purity, followed by the same measures for the entire population. Anybody who could not pass this test was dismissed from positions of leadership and responsibility. Soon other measures were announced, all directed at excluding Jews from public life. Jews could not anymore serve as blood donors, could not serve as volunteer firemen, very important, right? Could not be on boards or foundations and organizations. Jewish doctors could not anymore treat non-Jewish patients. In Breda, these accumulating measures imposed by the invaders were immediately accepted and activated by the governing city authorities. Slyly, the Nazis established Jewish advisory boards who would regulate the progressive measures of what basically was the Endlösung der Judenfrage, the solution of the Jewish problem. Other anti-Jewish measures included the establishment of the German bank. Slyly again, the forced continuation of a well-known and Jewish-owned bank, Lippmann Rosenthal, was seized by the Nazis. All Jews were required to transfer all their assets to that bank, Lippmann Rosenthal, from which these assets were all blocked and transferred to, you guessed it, Germany. Jews could not buy or sell gold or own it, were barred from owning a radio because they were listening to the BBC, and had to surrender all radios to the authorities. Could not own or ride bicycles, and had to hand them in, as everybody did. You couldn't ride your bike on the street anyway, you would be arrested. Jewish children could not participate in swimming lessons, and were excluded from all swimming pools and beaches. Then, Jewish children could not attend public schools anymore. Thus, the Jewish community established a separate school, but when the student number diminished as more and more Jewish children disappeared into hiding, a single classroom was established to teach them. The national, here you have, I'm sorry, right, and here you have a little classroom, which I don't know when this was sometime in 1942, and here you will see my brother. Oh, sorry, push the right button, Martin. Okay, this is my brother, and you see, by the way, what he's wearing here. This is a classroom. This is all the children that were left in the city, the Jewish children. This was my older sister. This was my younger sister. And I apologize, I'm not on here. I simply was yet too young to go to school. So I had to stay home. at that time, the National Office of the Dutch Red Cross, the Red Cross, in The Hague ruled that blood of Jewish blood donors could only be used for transfusion to Jewish patients, and vice versa. In 1940, early 41, all Jews had to register and were issued an ID card with the big letter J. But who exactly was a Jew? If you have a Christian mother and a Jewish father or whatever. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that question because this is fully covered by what was a question in Germany in the 30s, just the same, after Hitler took over. Hitler's race laws the Nuremberg laws were infamous, and this has been covered in libraries, whole libraries that you can find, including upstairs here. The measures became, however, successively more serious. Jews were to wear a Jewish star, as you saw on my here. They're already wearing it. They were to wear a Jewish star when venturing in public as of May 3rd, 1942. Thus, the Jews were declared outlaws, so everybody could immediately recognize these lowly characters. With all these measures, the Nazis had the one goal: endlosing the Judenfall. The total extermination of Europe's Jews, which had been decided on during the top-secret Nazi Wannsee conference on January 10, 1942, had decided to exterminate the Jews of Europe. And one of the people there, they collected all of the important top Nazi figures. It came to, and they decided on what to do. And Adolf Eichmann, one of the top Nazi functionaries driving the anti-Jewish designs with the Nazis, presented a summary of the list of the Jews of Europe to be exterminated by one method or the other. And this is a table typed personally by Eichmann of who has to be eliminated. And you will see that, I can't go away from this microphone because you can't hear me. Okay. In Austria, there were 132,000 Jews. In Generalgouvernement, which was occupied Poland, there were 240,000. There were 400,000 in some protectorate. Anyway, there were 34,000 in Belgium. There were 5 million in the USSR, 750 million in Hungary, and this is interesting, 330,000 in England. In other words, already then they were hoping to occupy England and to clean out its Jewish inhabitants as well. Here is the list. Eichmann himself typed it. As for the Jewish star, just an interesting idea, the Dutch police in Breda, the city where I'm talking about, tested it on May 2nd, 1942, as the Jews came out of the Breda synagogue. And they arrested 2 people for transgression of the edict. They had to wear the Jewish star. But they were set free as the Dutch police, not the Germans, not the SS, the Dutch police had been over-eager because the edict was to start on May 3rd. Just to show you, they were over-eager to collaborate, not all, but many, to collaborate with the Nazi Germans. In June 42, the Jews were forbidden to tread the central market square of the city, and their exclusion for the city parks was already, as I already mentioned. Now Jews were forbidden to receive parcels in their homes or buy from salesmen at the door. And then they could only buy at specific stores. Then, in hundreds of sites in the city, a notice appeared. Forbidden for Jews. And this was on stores, and in streets, and in parks, and in schools, and in public buildings, and you name it. So imagine each one of you, you go out, and you come to the UCSD library, and it says, no entry. You are no good. For Joden, verbod. At this time, At this time, Jewish men were called up to leave for Germany to work for the Nazis. Some men went into hiding, but most appeared at the required time, saying that they were strong enough to work. Little did they know that they were transported to slave labor camps, of which you've heard, for example, Auschwitz. Few of these volunteers to work lived more than a few months because they died from either exhaustion, from slave labor, were shot by their jailers, or were otherwise executed. An example, my father died in Auschwitz in early 43. My aunt, his sister, my aunt Adele, died in Auschwitz on the 24th of September, 1943. What were their crimes? Will somebody please volunteer? I don't know. At the Jewish cemetery in Breda, there's a beautiful Jewish cemetery, they established a memorial for the people who did not come back when they were, and it said, had a name, when they were born, and when they died, and were. And so, as I just said, my father is somebody, here's my father. He died in Auschwitz, as I just told you. Here's my aunt who died in Auschwitz. But everybody else died in Sobibor. And we'll talk about it somewhat further, which was not a concentration camp, but an extermination camp. And we will talk about it a little more. Quite interesting, just to make this a little closer to the soul than to the brain. This is my sister, who was born 5 years before me. She died in Sobibor on the 23rd of April, 43. This was my brother, who was born a year or two after my sister. And he died on the same date in Sobibor. And this, my mother, who was born then and died on the same day. They were pushed, talk about it in a moment, into trains, Eichmann trains, which took them in 3 days to Sobibor. They disembarked and were gassed to death within 24 hours. As I just started to say, on July 3, 1942, the first global Nazi directive of global deportations was started. Families with children, old folks, anybody with a J in an ID card was systematically rounded up and transported to Westerbork, the internment camp in the north of Holland. As the deportation started, whole families disappeared without a trace. They went underground, moving into hiding places with Christian families. While that sounds good, they were now gone, they couldn't be found. It wasn't so simple. There was austerity, and there were limitations on everything that you need in order to live. All the necessities of life were limited by the issuance of food stamps. So, and these stamps, of course, were issued only to legal residents, not to the Jews. By taking in Jews, families hiding them ran the distinct danger of suffering real hunger. More importantly, anyone caught to be hiding Jews was treated as the Jews were. When a Catholic family was found to help, or worse, hide even one Jewish individual, the family was often arrested and sent to the death camps themselves. And you know what happened to them there. Alternatively, families helping Jews were often summarily put to the wall, shot on the spot. As I said, taking in Jews was not at all easy and represented a high degree of courage, of ethical behavior, and of mortal danger. Additionally, Nazi collaborators and traitors who went to the local German SS or to the collaborating Dutch police to inform on the location of Jews hiding from the authorities received an honorarium of 10 guilders, was a lot of money at the time, per denounced Jew. If you find that your neighbor has two Jews hiding, you announce this to the police pick them up, you get 20 guilders, that was enough to live a whole month. Later, this was increased to 15 guilders because Jews were disappearing to the camps and or being killed, and hence they had to raise it in order to catch more Jews. This was a particularly despicable conspiracy that was widely used by the good neighbors of the Jewish families. It was, in fact, the most despicable behavior by some of the Dutch collaborators. Collaborators, quislings, traitors, informers, these were reprehensible behaviors of about 8% of the Dutch collaborators, who were, however, punished severely after the war by the Dutch authorities and the citizenry. Prior to being ordered to appear for deportation with her 4 children, ages 9, 7, 5, and 3, my mother had arranged to have the smaller 2 children go into hiding. About this in a moment. She and her two older children, my brother and sister, also went into hiding with a baker in a nearby town. However, the 3 of them were denounced in Cornwall by a neighbor of the baker, arrested by the Dutch police, and sent to punishment in Camp Vught and later in Westerbork, and later they found their way to, by Eichmann's trains, to Sobibor, the extermination camp, where they of course found their death. A small diversion of the story, and it's as following. Some of you, especially the younger people among you, may be at a loss why on May 11, 1960, Israel kidnapped Adolf Eichmann from Argentina, where he was hiding, and tried him in a specially convened court in Jerusalem. In his trial, Eichmann claimed to have been a low-level administrator who ran trains all through Europe. It's not illegal to run trains, is it? He just coordinated the running of the trains in Europe at war to transport the Jews and some other undesirables to the 1,200 concentration camps the Nazis had established all through Europe, and to the Travniki death camps, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, the special extermination camps where all that was done was kill people who came in there. And in these Travniki death camps, I'll explain Travniki in a moment, 2.7 million people were exterminated. The need for planning the routes and timetables of these trains was crucial in Europe at the time, where rolling stock was at a premium, as Nazi soldiers and equipment and armaments had to be moved long distances in the presence of Allied bombing in Germany and in the rest of occupied Europe. Interestingly, transporting Jews to their death had a higher priority than transporting German forces to fight the Allies, or to fight Russia. To answer this, why this low-level administrator, Eichmann, was kidnapped by the Israeli Mossad and brought to trial in Israel is clear. Transporting 2.7 times 10 to the 6 people to be killed in extermination camps was a big deal. And Eichmann did a thorough job, hence his abduction and his conviction in Jerusalem in 1992. This is the end of this diversion about Eichmann. My sister, 6, and I, by now 4, were collected from our home by a lady living in a nearby town, Bergen op Zoom, the small town, on the evening prior to the orders to appear for deportation on the morning of the next day. A lady whom we had never seen came on a rainy, dark evening wearing a wide cape. She spoke a few minutes to our mother and left with her, and we left with her, walking under that cape to the train station. We were not stopped by the police or the SS, just lucky, and we made it safely to the town of Rahayim. We arrived there in Bergen op Zoom at the train station, and when we did, another lady suddenly appeared, I remember that very well, from the rainy shadows on the other side of the train station. She took my sister with her and walked in a direction opposite the direction I walked with my savior, whose name was Mrs. Haas. How was this double hiding act organized? The Social Service Catholic Women's Organization had been active in the Netherlands, in the southwest of the Netherlands, for 25 years. These women, organized under the name catechists, assisted pregnant women and young mothers during the first month after they gave birth or during their pregnancy. 2 of these women, sisters by the name of Koppelaar, and you'll see a variety of double vowels like in Dutch, had helped my mother with birth of her children, and had also helped mothers of 2 Catholic families, or many families, prior to and after some of their birth, the sisters Koppelaar mediated the hiding events between our mother and the two other women in families named Haas and Bars. There you have all these double vowels. These socially active Koppelaar sisters were active in the resistance and had mediated our hiding places in total secret. During my 4 years, basically 4 years in hiding, the Haas family with 6 children, ostensibly as a faraway Catholic cousin from a hard-hit area in the northeast of the country, very few people know of my origins, my real name, or the city I came from. On the morning after my arrival, my adopting mother, Mrs. Haas, collected the children of the family in the living room and let me choose a new name. And she had 2 possibilities, 2 names. She said, you can choose your name. I chose the name Broer, brother. And from now on, my name was to be Broer Haas, not MartinHaas, but Broer Haas. I got a new identity at the age of 4. The only people who knew who I was and where I came from, the only person, was my school teacher, who taught at the public, not the Catholic school of the city, which I started a few months after adjusting somewhat. Even the decision to send me to a public school, not the Catholic school of the city, involved serious dangers. Why would I not go with all the children of the family, his family, to a Catholic school in the town? The reason was twofold. There were many suspected Jew haters in and around the Catholic school. Additionally, Mother Haas decided that it was unjust to give me a Catholic education like her own children were receiving. This too was dangerous, but a highly courageous and ethical decision. My sister was sent to the Catholic school and was given a Catholic education. My sister was baptized and was being reared as a Catholic, apparently to save a soul for Jesus from among the God-killers. As a result, my sister suffered dearly, much more than I did. It started a saga, which I may relate some other time in the future. This saga was very interesting psychologically, but not quite beautiful. It made for a tough life for my younger sister, my older sister. It is impossible to overstate the dangers the Haas family took upon themselves, taking me in as a hidden Jewish child. Impossible to overstate. They, as many others, could have been arrested and summarily executed, as had happened to many others in similar cases. The entire family were in danger of death by the occupying Nazis. Here's an example of the way the German Nazis deported the Jewish citizens of the city of Breda. You can see that the Wehrmacht and the SS were very courageous soldiers. This is what they occupied themselves with large parts of the year. During my years in hiding with the Haas family and the sisters Koppelaar, the sisters Koppelaar, who had basically found me the address and my sister the addresses where we could be hidden, kept in touch, though I do not recall ever having seen them. One of the sisters wrote a letter to me every half year. And here is the letter from one of the sisters Koppelaar. And she writes, a few of us can read this. You get a real letter from me. Do you like that? How are you doing at school? Do you know, can you calculate little calculations already? And can you read some words? It would be wonderful if I came to look at you, but I can't, even though she came, of course, and delivered this letter. I have to work a lot. When the war is over, I will come to you, and it doesn't take all that long, except it took another 2.5 years. Be good and nice and whatever, and this is the end. And then she signed a name which means nothing, because she couldn't identify herself, because she too would have been hauled off to the camps and killed. By Boer, that's now my name, right? Best regards, and a hand from Miss B.R., whoever that was Sister Koppelaar. At the same time that she or her sister visited me or the family once every half year, she brought a letter, she allowed me to write a letter to my sister, I could not write, and my sister would write a letter to me. And even though we were in the same town with different families, we never saw each other. Never. And this is a letter, a real letter, in January 44 from my sister to me. Of course, I don't have the letters sent to my sister. I don't know where they are. Maybe I'll try to find them. I am also in school, she writes. I'm in first grade. I have got a lot of stuff from presents from St. Nicholas, and we had a wonderful Christmas, blah, blah, blah. And now my letter is finished. So she also got sent me. To give you an idea of the family with whom I spent 4 years in hiding, I'll show you a picture made after the war, after Demjanjuk, the city where it was now hidden, was liberated. It was liberated on October 28, 1944, by a Polish division of the British Army. This was actually quite interesting, and I don't have it in my notes, but I will tell you very fast because there's no time. I was somewhere on the 28th of October, a Polish division. Of course, whoever could fight was organized into the American, the British, the French, whatever armies were organized. And Polish young men were organized in a division of the British Army. And on the 28th of October, my hiding mother, MartinHaas, told me I was busy with something in the house, or outside, I don't remember. And she calls me and says, go to the beach. And I didn't care much to go to the beach. She said, go to the beach and go look what's happening. Because the armies were streaming from Belgium into Holland, crossing the Westerschelde, the broad river in the southwest of the Netherlands. And you will never forget that, she said, because she apparently heard from other children what was happening. And I went there, and I saw it, and I will never forget this picture my whole life. There were dozens and dozens of amphibian tanks crossing from Belgium to the town, and when the Nazi forces saw that, they all ran away. There was no fight, and the city was free. But just seeing that sort of event where the armies come to liberate you, and seeing that as a child, I was now by 6 or 7, 6 probably, to see that 7 is something you can never forget. And indeed, I do not ever forget. Anyway, you see here a picture of the family, of the 6 children of the family with whom I was hidden. And this is the church of the Demjanjuk, and this is in a large field. Only the Dutch among you can understand what it meant. The Tikropot, it was so called. It was a big empty field. Up till today, it's an empty field next to the beach. And you see here 6 children and myself. Here's me. And it's actually, there are all kinds of stories, interesting stories. This was after the liberation, and the British Army had all kinds of trucks and armaments and ammunition, whatever, stored everywhere in the city and around the city where they could. And here were all these big trucks standing, and there were many more, parked. And we kids, of course, as dangerous as little kids are, we went and checked what's in those trucks. And we managed to put our hand to a corner of the load of these trucks. And what do you think was in them? Big bags of dates. So we took a handful of dates from one of these bags and ate dates. And up till today, not dates. In Breda, the city where I was born, where we're talking about, the great majority of the Jews were taken in custody. 200 houses of deported Jews were plundered and lost to thieves, and I have never gotten a single fork from the house of my parents, my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, nothing. As you can imagine, and I will say it nevertheless, I wrote it down, many Jewish people in hiding were deported following treason by their neighbors and betrayed. They were deported to death camps in Germany and Poland, and none survived. Additionally, some Christians helping Jews were in hiding were deported, and few survived. The Dutch civil service, the police, the Red Cross, and many other Dutch organizations collaborated closely with the Nazis. However, not all Dutch non-Jews were traitors and collaborating racists. There's one story which I cannot tell because there's no time. I have the slides, but I won't show you. You may know this story. This is a person who already in the 30s saved 10,000 children, Jewish children, from all over Europe. And it's a very interesting story, and I have no time to talk about it because there just is no time. Going back to some early events in the life of the Dutch family under the Nazi occupation, prior to the important speech, I have mentioned many behavior that were forbidden to Jews. They could not, the gratitude to this person. They could not use public transportation, they could not use city parks, there was a ban on children going to school, all financial assets were confiscated, they had to wear the David Star, there were a lot of limitations, prohibitions. All faculty at universities, Jewish faculty, were dismissed. All university students were sent home. It was a mess. One prohibition, which I have not mentioned, and there were many more, but never mind, was a prohibition, imagine, for Jews to eat or buy meat. Jews could not buy meat. The Nazi occupier had forbidden Jews to buy or eat meat in general, and cow liver in particular. A decree that can be explained only by a deeply sick obsession of the occupation and its masters in Berlin with the relationship of Jews to blood. The medieval blood libel at Passover is of course widely disseminated in the Christian world, the so-called belief that Jews use blood of a Christian child to make matzah, the unleavened bread that Jews eat during Passover in commemoration of the Exodus from Egypt. The blood libel is as bizarre as can be, but was, and amazingly still is, deeply ingrained in certain Christian environments, particularly, of course, in Europe. Be that as it may, the Nazi occupation authorities in Holland forbade Jews to purchase meat, whatever for that matter. Our mother thought that eating liver was healthy and strengthening, and thus being fully aware of the dark future that was awaiting our family and our children, my mother had arranged with a Catholic neighbor to buy and prepare fried liver for her growing children. And I remember very well being told that this would strengthen us for the trials awaiting us. Indeed, I remember walking in the dark evenings with my 3 siblings along the street, no more than about 2 or 3 blocks, to visit our mother's friend who had prepared fried liver for us. I remember these dark walks to a neighbor's house where we ate fried liver in her kitchen to strengthen us. I especially remember these excursions because at times there was a low full moon shining on us, a phenomenon so imposing that a young impressionable child, when I was like that, remembers it for life. Indeed, I do. Thus, the Jews' lives were made impossible. Then, the deportations started. As already mentioned, my younger sister and I were smuggled out of the house to stay with Catholic families in another town for 3 months or so. Little did anyone suspect that it took more than 3 years. In the meantime, however, the Nazis could find and arrest whoever the Nazis could find and arrest, which was transported to death camps in mostly in southeastern Poland, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. Importantly, I need to mention here that the Dutch administration, the deportation of its Jews to the death camps was meticulously registered and controlled, due to which the German judiciary in 2009, just 10 years ago, could legally prosecute Ivan Demjanjuk for crimes against humanity. The Dutch administration was so exact in registering where the names, the place of birth, the date of birth, and etc., and the addresses, that this was very important. So people were transported by train, by airlines trains, from Camp Westerbork to mostly Sobibor. What were these extermination camps like? Well, here's an example. There are... Oh, I have to say one other thing, really unbelievable. At the infamous Wannsee conference in early 1942 in Berlin, the top Nazis, brass, and heads of different German government departments decided that killing Europe's Jews by shooting them, as was happening all over Eastern Europe, was too expensive in bullets wasted. Also, the 11 million Jews who had to be exterminated ate a lot of food, so you couldn't just, you had to get rid of them. At the Wannsee meeting, 3 special extermination camps were planned, as I already said, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. I will only present some details about the extermination camp Sobibor, as many of the Dutch Jews, including my whole family, were transported by trains to Sobibor. Each train, once a week, transported between 1,000 and 1,500 deportees to Sobibor in Poland, from Westerbork in northeastern Holland. As I already said, the lists were meticulous, and that's very lucky, because, I'll come to that, only because of that could Demjanjuk be taken to court in Munich in 2009. And this is an example of Sobibor. This was the smallest of the 3 extermination camps, and what you have here is the trains would come, and I have a picture, a little bad picture of what it looked like, and they would unload their, these were cattle trains. You would unload the helpless people who were in that train without seats, without beds, without heat, without food, and without water, and without sanitation for 3 days. They came here, were taken out of the trains, and walked through this big building 4, and 4 was a building where they had to hand in their baggage. After they handed their baggage, they moved to Camp C. It was all separate, A, B, C. Camp C, where in number 5, they had to undress. Everybody undressed and handed in place 6, in little building 6, all of their jewelry or money or whatever they might have with them. They then were to walk, and were made to walk, this half-kilometer walkway to the gas chambers. There were 3 gas chambers, later there were 6. Each, quote, load of a gas chamber was about 800 people. So they could kill a lot of people. Indeed, in a year and a half, they killed 350,000 people summarily. So this is an example. There are no blueprints or plans of the extermination camps. In fact, after the Sobibor, after the Wannsee conference, all of the records of that meeting were destroyed, because the Nazis did know very well what they were doing. After the breakout, there was a breakout in this camp in I believe it was October 43, after 350,000 people had been killed. The camp was demolished, bulldozed and plowed under, and trees were planted over its entire area. The Nazis in Berlin knew and understood what an unprecedented crime against humanity they were guilty of, and they tried to cover up their crimes. After planting thousands of trees over the entire camp area, the site now is a dense forest. Current investigation of the camp are taking place by archaeologists, and they're finding all kinds of interesting things. And of course, they have to cut the trees. What I didn't show is they went, they were walked to the gas chambers, and when they were then dead, they were either buried in Camp T, which was completely separate from the other part of this big camp. They were all thrown either into mass graves, or they were burned at the stake. And apparently there was an unbelievable stench in the whole area of Sobibor. The camps in Belzec and Treblinka were larger and more Jews were killed there, using industrial methods. Apart from a small number of prisoners who were kept alive for a short while to work in the camp, all others brought there were immediately gassed to death, then buried in mass graves and were buried at the stake, as I just told you. There's an interesting story about Ukrainians in the Travniki camp. So 3 camps were Travniki camp. Travniki was a camp next to Lublin in eastern Poland, or Ukraine, where Ukrainians particularly were taught to kill. They spent 6 to 8 weeks there and were taught to kill. And they were taught to kill because even the SSers had difficulty killing thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of innocent people. And so they used Ukrainians, and there's a long story which I'll try to make short. In 1932-33, and some of you historians will know this, Stalin wanted to organize all of the Ukrainian peasants in communal farms. And he did not succeed, they didn't want to. And so he starved them to death. And according to some lists or some investigations, he starved to death 10 million Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians were, as a result, really the enemies of the Russians. So when Nazi Germany invaded Russia, the Ukrainians were with the invaders because they hated Russia. When they were in the hands of the Nazis, because they lost, the Nazis would treat them in the Travniki camp to be killers of hundreds of thousands of people. That's why the Ukrainians were used as killers. In fact, a camp like Sobibor was run by a handful, maybe 24 SSers, who were trained and tested for readiness to kill innocent people, with the help of 120 Ukrainian Travniki who had been taught in the Lublin area. It is important to note that these specially trained Travniki watchmen killers did so as volunteers. It's important because I'm going to talk in a moment about the trial. They could and did often ask for reassignment away from the role as killers of the innocent, the old, women, and children. It is significant also that the Nazis needed the Ukrainian Travniki killers because the SSers, even the SSers, balked. We go to the next stage, and that is, why did the German nation in 2009, just 9 years ago, 66 years after the Shoah, decide to prosecute Ivan Demjanjuk for crimes against humanity? One important reason was that whereas Demjanjuk had been targeted for 40 years in Cleveland by the US Department of Justice as a Wachmann, as a can you translate this for me?
Watchman?
A watchman, yeah, okay. As a watchman in one of these Travniki camps, there was no proof that he had been the Ukrainian guard watchman in Sobibor, in spite of significant evidence given by other guards. And I'm thinking of names you may have read here or there. There was no direct evidence, but there was a friend of his, a watchman, a Wachmann, by the name of Demjanjuk, you may have heard of him, who gave in the 80s evidence to the Soviets, recorded by a movie, by sound, about Demjanjuk. And it was clear that Demjanjuk and his friend was his friend, and they had even lived together after the war and during the war, and it was clear what Demjanjuk had done, but there was no evidence. What's more, during the trial, Demjanjuk and some others who knew him from Sobibor was dead, so they couldn't use him in the trial. However, in 1995, after the breakup of the USSR, the Russians were ready to open their archives to the US Department of Justice. And important evidence was found there in the case the US Department of Justice had been following for 40 years. And this is, and you've probably seen this on the web at one time and another, this was the ID as a Travniki of Demjanjuk. And by now, he could not anymore say, no, he wasn't there. What's more, I don't have my notes, but it's really quite interesting, and I heard this, of course, in the trial. When Demjanjuk asked for asylum or asked to emigrate to the United States in the early 50s, they wanted to know if he was a Nazi, because if he had been a Nazi, the United States, the Department of State would not have let him in. And they asked him, where have you been during the war? What did you do during the war? He says, oh, he was a farmer. Where? In Sobibor. Because Sobibor was a minor little village of agricultural farmers, which nobody this side of the Rhine had ever heard of. So how come this guy talks about Sobibor? Obvious, it was the place that came to mind because he had spent 2.5 years there. Anyway, the question became, on what legal basis? Let me say one thing before that. The German judiciary had lots of evidence and lots of papers to try to accuse and then get a guilty verdict of Demjanjuk as being a Wachmann in Sobibor. But they did not want to have a paper trial. So they looked for and found 24 Dutchmen, mostly, one German, who had lost their families, immediate kin, mother, brother, father, or something like that, or sister, in Sobibor. And these people were asked to come to the trial and, of sorts, give evidence that there were real people who were killed there because it was their family. And so the Germans looked for and found, I was one of 24 people who were co-accusers, or in German, Nebenkläger. The German law allows for that. So there's not only the accuser and all the lawyers and the judges, the big court case in Munich, 7 judges. There were 24 people like myself who had lost immediate family in Sobibor. Nevertheless, it was difficult to get a trial, a legal trial in Germany against a man for whom there is no direct evidence. On what basis could Demjanjuk be tried in Germany? He was a foreigner, not a German, in Ukrainian America, and a Ukrainian American, who committed heinous crimes against yet other foreigners, Dutch Jews, in a yet another foreign country, Poland, without direct evidence of a smoking gun, or other weapons, or fingerprints, without a body of any of the victims, without evidence by an eyewitness who saw Demjanjuk killed and who might be able to testify against him. Hence, exactly where did Demjanjuk commit the crimes? Exactly who was murdered? Exactly where did the murders in question occur? And when did the specific murder occur? I refer you, if you wish to look at the legal aspects of this whole thing. There's a book a couple of years ago published by Lawrence Douglas, The Right Wrong Man. The man, I met him, of course, at the trial because I was only 5 times in Munich, and he was there for every session of the court. And he took copious notes, and he wrote this book. He's a lawyer himself. Wrote a book, The Right Wrong Man. I have it here. You can see it if you wish. Which is actually very interesting. So I'm not going to talk about the fine points of this law, of this case. Importantly, the names and complete identity of the victims from the Netherlands are known. So they only accused Demjanjuk of being an accessory to murder of 27,900 or 28,000 Dutchmen. because of all the other people, 320,000 others, there were no lists. We don't know who they are. They came from all over Europe. The victim's time of death are known. Their place of death is known. The method of killing is known. The disposal of the bodies is known. And the chains of command are known. Furthermore, the presence of Ivan Demjanjuk at the time and place that the crimes were committed is known. And the premeditated intent to murder is known, though the Nazis destroyed evidence of the Wannsee Conference and of Sobibor. I have already shown this. This was a very important document, and I was in court there in Munich, and there were days after days, 3, 4, 5 hours, that lawyers from both sides were discussing whether this ID was made up, falsified by the Russians in order to do him in, because they hated the Ukrainians, just like the Ukrainians hated the Russians because of Stalin. And so you cannot even imagine the discussions that they had. Was this a real ID, or was this a fake made by the Russians? And they referred in all of these discussions where, oh, sorry. What's going on? Oh, sorry. Here we go, sorry. So, is this a picture that they had put onto this ID card? Because this didn't fit exactly, the stamp didn't fit exactly. And there were who knows how many other arguments that this might have been something, this ID, faked by the Russians in order to do this Ukrainian in, blah, 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 because the Russians executed many of these Ukrainians who had participated in the killing of the Jews. So the question is, how did the Bavarian Supreme Court legally create the case against Demjanjuk? Suffice to say here that the trial in the Bavarian Supreme Court defined new legal territory and changed the typical evidence presented in a customary murder trial. In a murder trial, you want to know at what time was the murder to take place, where's the victim's body, where's the gun that was used, where's the other evidence, etc. But none of that was existent. So the Bavarians, and there's a particular lawyer who I met who designed this, did the following. They accused him not of murder, but of accessory to murder, based on two completely new situations. Anyone who was transported to the Sobibor extermination camp as a prisoner was brought there to be murdered and was murdered. Anyone who was present at Sobibor but was not a victim to be murdered was a murderer or an accessory to murders pursued at Sobibor. And based on that, they could accuse Demjanjuk of being an accessory to murder of 28,000 Dutch people, for whom the names and the details and the time of death and who knows what was all, of course, known. So, umpteen hours were spent to prove in court, to prove who was being murdered. They had to do so, to show when the murders took place, to pinpoint where the murders occurred, to prove the presence of the accused at the murder at the time of murders, and to show how the murders were executed. As a result, the prosecution and the court argued extensively to show that he had been trained to mass murder, he was not Travniki, he had volunteered to serve in the mass murder camp, had voluntarily remained in the camp to murder, had ideological convictions to mass murder Jews, and though he was Ukrainian, a prisoner of war of the Germans, he had participated voluntarily. And he did not desert or leave when the opportunity arose, as indeed happened often. Through the entire trial period, hundreds of court hours, Demjanjuk was wheeled into the courtroom on a stretcher. He lay on a stretcher all through the court of almost 2 years of the proceedings, while the court of 7 judges presented in a very formal manner, a very formal affair, and Demjanjuk were lying on a stretcher. This is the way he was brought in. He said that he is not feeling well and he's sick and who knows what. And you see here, he's being pushed into the, he comes from the door, next door here, he pushed into the courtroom. This is a doctor who was with him in the jail and in the courtroom always. This is just a transporter. And you have another picture, he had this hat on, and often he had sunglasses, and he never moved, and he, from time to time, you heard him groan, that he had pains. And here you see, he was, this is a translator, a young lady who translated the German court proceedings into Ukrainian. And she constantly, poor girl, poor woman, was sitting there and whispering in his ear the Ukrainian for what was going on in the court. Here's an idea, and it's a bad picture. I wasn't there and I didn't take a better picture. An idea of what it looked like when people got out of these trains. It was, believe me, I think so, I wasn't there, luckily, terror. It was terror from A to Z. It's not only the fact that all these people were executed and killed, the gas. It's that every procedure, every part of the process was as bad as can possibly be. Now, during the court case, the court, the many lawyers, the witnesses, the Nebenkläger like myself, we were all incredulous. In fact, many people connected with the case were angry with him, with the accused, with the defendant. It was generally expected and hoped that this sadistic murderer would finally open his mouth and tell all. Tell what went on in Sobibor, divulge what really happened there. It was hoped that prior to his leaving the earth, he would reveal the details of the murders that were pursued for unimaginable hatred, racism, and overwhelming discrimination. But Demjanjuk refused to say a word. He took it all with him to the grave. That's not quite true. I heard it myself. He said one minor sentence, and I heard it myself. He said, I don't remember in response to what, he said something to the effect of, I'm not Hitler, am I? That's all he said during that whole trial. And everybody in the trial was hoping that he would finally repent and say, yes, this was bad. I didn't really want to do it, but I had to do it, or my left foot it hurt, or I hate Jews, or whatever he was going to say. Not a word. That was very bad. I would like to add 3 items about this trial. My adult daughter, Daphne, she was at the time a physician at UCSF, took her whole family suddenly, bang, on a plane from San Francisco, where she served as a physician at UCSF, to Munich. Suddenly, there she appeared. Well, she told me ahead of time. And they participated in the 2 first days of the trial. And on her way back, she had to go back to work. She had patients to see. On her way back to San Francisco, she wrote an essay, not so long, not particularly long, a short summary of what went on at the trial. It is one of the best reports on the emotional weight of the trial. And you can find that here. I have some copies of it here. There's her picture, and you can pick it up if you are interested. Otherwise, you just go to Google and you write Daphne Haas and Demjanjuk. You don't have to remember this whole identity. Daphne Haas, Demjanjuk, and it pops up on the web. Number 1. It's very interesting to read because there are many psychological aspects to this trial, way beyond the facts I'm trying to tell you. Number 2, I was allowed to, as Helga just said, to give a summary speech, a summary statement in the trial, at the end of the trial in 2011, yeah. That final session of the trial was held in the central, what do you call it? Court building in central Munich. The building where Hitler and his ilk had prosecuted, or accused and not prosecuted, many of the people who worked against the Nazis. Among them, the famous White Rose young people who were fighting against him. So there was the final case, the final session, and I gave a talk. I gave a summary statement, and the summary statement, you can just look online, you'll find it there as well. In fact, I was, as Helga just said, I was one of the most extreme people speaking there, because I am convinced that the facts are just obvious, what was going on and what he did and what he didn't do. And so in the book of Lawrence Douglas, which I just showed you a picture of, he quotes me 4 or 5 times, 6 times, I don't know, about my summary speech. But I'll show you the last little paragraph of my summary speech. I was standing there in a big courtroom in Germany, in Munich, and I said, John Demjanjuk, pointing to him, j'accuse. I accuse you of distortion, evasion, equivocation, and above all, of being an unrepentant coward and an accomplice, a willing executioner with the SS. Therefore, I call upon this court to hand the defendant, John Demjanjuk, the maximum sentence allowable under the law. Now, some of you will know why I said j'accuse. This is a famous case of Émile Zola and Dreyfus in 1901. Dreyfus was a French officer, Jewish, who was thought to be, or accused to be, erroneously, a spy. And they followed him, and they prosecuted him, and the poor man went through every possible chamber of hell. Émile Zola, who was a journalist, got him out by writing an article in, I don't remember what paper, and by being in the, some of you may remember, and basically getting him free and getting him back to what he deserved, the good life. So that's what I did from her. The third point I would like to make is that were there any larger benefits to mankind that resulted from the Demjanjuk case? It was not a case where all we wanted to do is get this one man, at the age of 91 in the end, to be put in jail. Who cares? Is basically the story. But were there larger benefits to mankind from this case? And there were, and how? And this is following Douglas in his book. It yielded a modified theory of culpability directly connected to the exterminatory process. This disposed once and for all of the defense, I was no more than a cog in the machine, or its corollary, I was only obeying orders, which is what all these Nazis said in Nuremberg and elsewhere. A machine cannot run without its small constituent parts. As a result of the Demjanjuk case, it is now enough to prove that a defendant worked in a death factory. It's no longer crucial to prove that he committed a wanton murder on one body at one time with one gun. In the formula it is, guilt follows function, not act. And this is a major change in international law. I again ask number 2, were there any larger benefits? Were these? Well, yes. The case prompted further investigation into other low-level penetrators. And you read in the paper, if you read that stuff, every day. There's a Jose Schwamberger who worked in Polish camps, who is right now in court in Germany. There's Oskar Gröning, who was the bookkeeper of Auschwitz. And he said, he worked there for 5 years, and he said, he didn't know that anybody was killed there. How could he know? He was just bookkeeper. There's a Reinhard Hanning, who is being prosecuted right now in Germany. Based on the Demjanjuk case. Without the Demjanjuk case and the new principles, it would not have been possible to bring them to justice. And there are very recently 5 guards of the Buchenwald lager who are being brought to court in Germany today, again based on the same principles. Number 3, were there any larger benefits to mankind that resulted from the Demjanjuk case? Were there? It demonstrated the ability of mature legal systems to learn from past mistakes, and thus strengthened public confidence in the justice delivered by American, Israeli, and German courts, and more generally, the courts of liberal democracies. Finally, number 4, repeating myself, were there any larger benefits to mankind that resulted from the case? The complex legal processes in the US, Israeli, and German courts constituted the most convoluted, lengthy, and bizarre criminal cases to arise from the Holocaust, according to Douglas. This does justice to both the story's factual complexities and its moral and political conundrums. And I would like to leave you, I can, of course, just one more slide. I can, of course, answer questions if there are any. I want to leave you with just one picture, which basically says it all. At least for me, it says it all. And I warn you, it's not very pleasant to see or to look at it carefully, but it is a fact and factual. And this is it. I don't know in what ravine the picture was taken. I don't know the names of these 2 German soldiers or SSers who are killing, I haven't counted them, 40 or 50 Jewish women, stripped naked, and there obviously was somebody who lifted her head, who was not killed yet, and so this guy stands there stands there courageously and lifting his gun to kill that last woman of this group. This is, in part, what the Holocaust was all about. And it must lead us to soul searching. And maybe there will be some questions about this soul searching. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I ask you, for those who have really urgent questions, to raise your hand.
Susanne, you, okay, go, please.
Very quickly, your family pictures and those letters were so moving. The family pictures?
Just normal.
How did they survive? How were you able to obtain them?
In Breda, there were several photographers, and one was a Jewish shop. And my family went to him always to take pictures. And after the war, he was gone, but the archives were there. And so I got the pictures from them. I think you need a couple. Sorry.
What is your opinion now about the Polish government separating themselves from the killing camps?
Oh boy, thank you for asking that question. Last week, I may be wrong, maybe 2 weeks ago, I think it was last week. No, last week. The chairman of the European Parliament in Brussels referred to that Polish law where the Poles basically don't want anybody to mention the Polish concentration camps. Because, you know what, they were in Poland, but they were not Polish concentration camps. The Poles are right in that. But the Poles were not exactly lovely people. And so the head of the European Parliament today, and they don't like Jews that much either, yet today, said all over Europe, the Nazi anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish moves were welcomed in the Netherlands, Germany, in Poland, in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, in Italy, everywhere. With the exception of 10% or 20% of the population who were of different opinion and who helped the Jews. So the Jews, clearly there are facts, clearly were to be censored too about their participation in killing or trying to eliminate the Jews from the world, or from Europe at least. And so the Jews are right with respect to that, and the European Parliament is right. I personally think that the law is very exaggerated, and it has to be discussed and found out. What did they or what did they not do? Instead, they passed a law. As far as I'm concerned, I think I know why they passed this law. There is tremendous pressure of people whose families had large investments in Poland, houses, factories, you name it. There are many poor people, but there were 100,000 people who were of ability. And they have been pushing the Poles for reparations. And to avoid this, and to make sure that the Poles never participated in anything of this sort, they passed the law. That's my opinion. And nobody says it, except this lady who says here, yes. And me, and I think within a year, we will see that that's the story. They're afraid of mammon.
I just want to know about your sister. I've got a big voice. What happened to her afterward?
This is a very long story, and I promise I will once, if Suzanne wants me, be back and tell that story. It is particularly psychologically very interesting. And if you find out that I talk again, I'll talk about that and other things. Very interesting, but it's way too much.
I'll remember you saying that.
Yeah.
Wendy?
Yes, I wanted to ask about the Catholic Church now in Europe. I know in America, Christianity is a whole different thing.
Right.
So the people, the regular people in these countries, in Poland and in Holland, are they, has Catholic Church come to grips with this, and is religion, is Christianity on very little that's left there? Has it changed so that it's not the basis of so much anti-Semitism?
I am not an expert on the Catholic Church, as you can possibly imagine, even though I know all the rights of the Catholic Church because I did go to church during my young years. In areas in the small towns in Poland, in the small towns in Ukraine particularly, and as I hear from friends who are here, in Mexico, you can enter on Sunday morning into a church, and there's a diatribe against these bloody Jews today. I'm not sure what to say about it. It's not good, it's not nice, but I think to a large degree it's over, but not completely. Is the attitude of the Catholic Church, of the Pope, with respect to sexual crimes in the church, is that understood by the Catholic Church and over? Well, you've read about our current Pope, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's very difficult.
So thank you very much for sharing all this information from your fascinating life. I would like to ask something I'm sure you've thought about a lot. It takes a very great hatred by society to carry out crimes like this against the Jews. How do you explain this very great hatred arising in Germany and throughout Europe?
Thank you for asking. I thought nobody would ever ask me. And unfortunately, I'm ready for that question, any time of the day and the night. And I'll give you a roundabout answer. I have asked that question my entire life, close to 100 years now. How is this possible? What is it? And I have never found a question, I'm sorry, an answer. I just haven't found it. Until a Catholic priest by the name of James Carroll wrote in the early 90s a book called Constantine's Sword. He is a very intelligent Catholic priest. He left the church and has become a writer and a lecturer, very intelligent. And he gives the basis for this hatred, which was not, according to him, and I have no other opinion than him, and to me this is the answer. This was engineered, designed, and executed by the popes in the Vatican from the year 300. It's a thick book. It's 700 pages. It's a little hard to read because he has so many details. But once you read it, you will have no doubts anymore what happened, because it's factual, it's history. So to me, this is the answer to your question. How could it have happened? I mean, this is crazy. The last picture I showed you, this is crazy. And that's the basis. And this is the point that's very important to make. Well, first of all, if anybody wants to see this book, write it down, James Carroll, Constantine's Sword. You can buy it for $5. And buy it used on the web, and it's new, because all these people who got this from their children or from their wives have never read it, because it is 800 pages, and so it's all new, but they sell it for $5. You pay another $2.99 for postage, and that's all. And then you read it, it'll take you a year. But once you read it, you come to the conclusion why it is. It was designed for eschatological reasons, religious reasons. The Catholic Church, the popes, wanted to replace the Jews as the chosen people. The Catholic Church has no justification for itself, except when the Jews are suffering and are no good. And he explains this in 1,000 different ways, with historical evidence, and it's very, very interesting. I have no doubts anymore that that is the source. But that brings to another point which you didn't ask, and I'm sorry you didn't ask it, but I will answer it anyway without asking. So, what does this all lead to? What does it have to lead us to? To fight as well as we can against hatred. Not only of Jews, of Chicanos, of blacks, of homosexuals, of anybody you feel like hating. Stop this damn hating. Because what we saw here, this last picture, which is a disaster to even look at. A disaster. And this is a minor event. Minor, as major as it is all based on the building up of a cycle of hatred, which many people heard every Sunday morning in church. Stop hating, because we will see other events like this, because it builds up.
On this note, I think I would like us to conclude. If you have questions for Martin, please come forward, but join me in thanking him for a fascinating